A man was arrested after injuring 5 people with an axe at Dusseldorf's main train station late Thursday, police said, correcting earlier reports of 2 arrests. A spokeswoman for Dusseldorf police told the AP that the man arrested was also injured. Earlier, a spokesman for federal police, who are usually in charge of policing train stations, had said 2 people were arrested and further attackers might be on the run. Officers are searching the station and its surroundings, but that they do not have concrete information about further attackers at this stage.
The US has sent hundreds of additional troops to Syria in an effort to speed up the fight against ISIS. Roughly 500 troops are already fighting in Syria, but on March 9th, coalition spokesperson Colonel John Durain told reporters that an additional 400 troops were recently deployed. The additional 400 troops, made up of Marine and Ranger units, came with heavy artillery. They aim to establish an outpost to strike ISIS targets ahead of US-backed Kurdish forces fighting on the front lines. And while the deployment is technically temporary, it could signal a shift in the White House. Former President Barack Obama largely relied on assisting local forces on the ground. Current President Donald Trump has shifted military decisions off the White House and onto the Pentagon, letting them choose their own strategies, according to Al Jazeera. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham. Military officials believe ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has abandoned Mosul. The development would be a significant one for anti-ISIS forces, since Mosul is the extremist group's final big city stronghold in Iraq. A US military official told reporters on March 8th that the anti-ISIS coalition believed Baghdadi left Mosul sometime before Iraqi forces surrounded the city. Intelligence reportedly suggests that he is in transit towards the Syrian border, and he is probably somewhere in the rural, lawless border area. However, Baghdadi is notoriously hard to track. He's continuously on the move and hardly ever uses communication that can be intercepted and pinpointed. Officials also believe that Baghdadi is no longer directing ISIS forces in Mosul. Instead, the unnamed official said, quote, "He probably gave broad strategic guidance and has left it to battlefield commanders." For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham.
Let's talk about travel bans. And no, not just here in the US. Israel's parliament passed a law that denies foreigners entry if they make a, quote, public call for any type of boycott against the country or its territories. It's a swipe at the BDS campaign, which stands for Boycott, Divest, Sanctions. The group is a Palestinian-led opposition to Jewish settlements in the West Bank. The bill isn't quite the same as President Trump's travel ban on 6 Muslim-majority nations, but it's born from a similar motivation, and it has attracted similar criticisms. Proponents of the US and Israeli travel ban say each country has the right to protect itself from those who would do it harm. To them, blocking travelers with what they believe are harmful ideologies is crucial for national security. But Trump's initial travel ban was halted in court over claims it unfairly discriminated against religion by targeting Muslims. Similarly, Israel's travel ban is under fire from Jewish groups that claim the law unfairly stifles political speech and is undemocratic. Israel's Justice Ministry tried and failed to exempt Palestinians who live within Israel's borders from the law, which could make the ban tough to defend in court.
The U.S. can deport people without even involving a judge. It's called expedited removal, and President Trump wants to take it to a new level. The Obama administration used this a lot, but only for immigrants who had arrived within the last 2 weeks and were arrested in the border zone, which is already pretty wide. Trump wants expedited removal to be an option everywhere, not just near the border. And he wants to apply it for people who arrived in the past 2 years.
Our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more by hiring a record number of new border guards.
In 1996, Congress passed immigration reform that opened the door for expedited removal. It's a process that means even low-level immigration officers can order deportations of some non-citizens without any sort of official trial. The officer essentially serves as both the prosecutor and the judge, and operates with virtually unchecked authority. But expedited removal is not legally allowed to be used against asylum seekers. Under President Obama in 2013, these types of removals made up about 44% of all removals. Now a big question is, how will undocumented immigrants even prove they've been in the country for 2 years? expedited removal can happen in less than 24 hours. Some advocates are wondering if those immigrants will have to carry around a suitcase of receipts or other records. We'll find out as the Trump administration starts to actually put these policies in place.
It's been reported that a Washington restaurant has sued U.S. President Donald Trump and the company that operates his landmark Washington Hotel, claiming that patrons have shifted business there to curry favor with his new administration. According to Reuters, the suit, which was filed this week, does not seek monetary damages but wants Trump to divest from the hotel, resign, or close it while he is president. Their suit alleges Trump's ownership of the hotel, located a few blocks from the White House in the historic old post office building owned by the federal government, violates a rule that bars elected officials from being party to a lease or benefiting from it.
It turns out two separate faults in Southern California really aren't separate after all. A new study discovered the Newport Inglewood and Rose Canyon faults, the majority of which are just off the coast of Southern California, are really just one continuous fault system, and it's capable of producing an up to 7.4 magnitude earthquake. That puts the Newport Inglewood and Rose Canyon fault more on par with the famous San Andreas fault in terms of predicted earthquake strength. Even though we witnessed the San Andreas fault trigger a devastating earthquake in Los Angeles via Hollywood Magic in 2015, the last major quake in that region actually occurred in 1857. Researchers investigated part of the San Andreas fault that runs north of Los Angeles and found that large magnitude earthquakes occur on average there once every century. And the U.S. Geological Survey found the fault could be overdue for another. We're well past the 100-year mark, and the USGS says there's a 16% chance an earthquake with at least a magnitude 7.5 will occur in the area within the next 30 years. The last major earthquake to strike along the Newport Inglewood and Rose Canyon fault zone was in 1933. It was a magnitude 6.4.
European Council President Donald Tusk has been re-elected for a second term, with the support from every EU country except his native Poland. 27 members of the 28-nation bloc voted to re-elect Tusk for another 2.5-year term. According to the BBC, the Council President brings together heads of EU member states and seeks to achieve consensus on the EU's strategic direction. Tusk will also oversee the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the EU in the coming years. Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party is opposed to Tusk, who served as Poland's prime minister from 2007 to 2014. Polish Prime Minister Beata Szydło spoke out against Tusk, saying any candidate for the position should have the backing of his or her home country. Tusk himself acknowledged the fact that he was supported by every other country other than his own was a, quote, paradox. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
An iconic natural formation is destroyed by a storm, leaving people around the world heartbroken. Gale-force winds and large waves brought Malta's famous Azure Window crashing into the sea the morning of March 8th. The arch was a popular tourist attraction on the island of Gozo. It featured in films like Clash of the Titans and The Count of Monte Cristo, and was in the first episode of HBO's Game of Thrones. Malta Prime Minister Joseph Muscat called the news heartbreaking. He tweeted that natural corrosion was expected to eventually bring down the arch, but a 2013 study suggests the limestone formation was still very sound and would continue standing for decades. Despite efforts to keep visitors from walking over the arch, measures weren't strictly enforced, and signs warning people to stay back were often ignored. While the Azure Window is now gone forever, a less famous arch still stands nearby. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Cambry Caldwell.
According to the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Customs and Border Protection is releasing illegal border crossing data through February, and the data shows a surprising decline in traffic. Since January 2017, the number of illegal border crossings measured at our southern border has dropped by 40%. Since the Trump administration's use of executive orders to enforce immigration laws, apprehensions and inadmissible activity is headed towards the lowest monthly total in the last 5 years. The Daily Beast reports that on Tuesday night, the Boston-based LGBT veterans organization OutVets announced on its Facebook page that the South Boston Allied War Veterans Council had voted 9-4 to deny them entry into the 2017 South Boston St. Patrick's Day Parade. The ban comes just 2 years after the South Boston Allied War Veterans Council ultimately decided to allow out vets to march in the 2015 parade, after 2 decades of quarreling over the inclusion of LGBT groups. And now that the council has changed course so suddenly, they are once again facing the wrath of Boston. Corporate sponsor Anheuser-Busch said they were re-evaluating their participating in the event, and grocery chain Stop & Shop went a stage further and canceled their sponsorship. The Teamsters Local 25 union also announced they're not marching, and the parade's Army veteran Grand Marshal resigned.
Mexico has canceled sugar export permits to the United States over a disputed quota agreement. Reuters obtained a letter the Mexican Sugar Chamber wrote to sugar mills. The news agency says the letter informed the mills that existing permits have been canceled and will be reissued in April. The letter also says officials at the U.S. Commerce Department limited the amount of sugar Mexico could export based on a, quote, absurd interpretation of a trade agreement. In the letter, the chamber president says Mexico would be allowed to export only 40% of the quota until March 31st. The document also said Mexico has no counterparts at the U.S. Commerce Department to resolve the issue with. This is a reference to the fact that President Trump has not filled staff positions in several departments. According to Investopedia, Mexico is the top foreign sugar supplier to the United States. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul. Pakistan has closed its border with Afghanistan after reopening it for only 2 days. The border was originally closed on February 16th after a series of suicide attacks in Pakistan that the government blamed on Afghanistan-based militants. The Torkham and Chaman border crossings were reopened March 7th and 8th to allow stranded nationals on both sides of the border to return to their home countries. The Voice of America reports 2 men, a woman and a child, were trampled to death by a crowd of 20,000 Afghans rushing to get through the crossings. VOA also quotes a Pakistani official as saying 24,000 Afghans and 700 Pakistanis returned home via the border crossings. Al Jazeera reports Pakistan's defense minister said closing the border will prevent militants from crossing over. Meanwhile, the Pakistani ambassador to Afghanistan believes it will only hinder trade and ordinary people. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul. A top U.S. general has accused Russia of deploying a banned missile in violation of a landmark arms control treaty. General Paul Selva, vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, addressed the alleged violation Wednesday, March 8th, while speaking to the House Armed Services Committee. He said, quote, "We believe that the Russians have deliberately deployed it in order to pose a threat to NATO and to facilities within the NATO area of responsibility." General Selva said Russia violated the, quote, spirit and intent of a 1987 agreement that bans an entire class of cruise missiles. The New York Times previously reported Russia had deployed prohibited missiles, but General Selva's comments marked the first public confirmation. Russia rejects the notion that it violated the treaty. According to Reuters, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters, quote, "Russia was, is, and will abide by all international obligations, even when it is not entirely in Russia's interests." For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
Ever since the Brexit referendum, Scotland has been looking for a way to stay in the European Union, either by leaving the UK or derailing Brexit altogether. Now, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says autumn 2018 might be the best time for her country to try again to leave the UK.
I think would be the common sense time for Scotland to have that choice if that is the road we choose to go down.
If the country does leave the UK, it's not guaranteed EU membership. It would need unanimous approval from other member states, a few of which have their own independence movements they may not want to encourage. But there is a way forward. Scotland could potentially become a successor state to the UK, meaning it would inherit the UK's EU membership and all the benefits that come with it. Britain's Prime Minister is expected to start formal Brexit negotiations by the end of March. The UK plans to leave the EU by 2019.
It's called the Dirty Dozen. It's an annual list compiled by the Environmental Working Group of foods contaminated with pesticide residue. And this lovely little fruit sits at the top. The Shopper's Guide to Pesticides in Produce, released March 8th, ranks 48 popular fruits and veggies based on data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This year, strawberries were followed by spinach, nectarines, apples, and peaches in the top 5. What the list doesn't do is explain whether or not we should be worried. The World Health Organization says pesticides can be toxic to humans. They're used on many crops to keep pests like insects, rodents, and bacteria from contaminating our food and spreading diseases. According to this new EWG report, simply washing fruits and vegetables might not remove pesticide residue. On the flip side, the EWG ranks sweet corn, avocados, and pineapples as the top contenders in the Clean 15 list. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Camry Caldwell.
A new report finds black people continue to be more likely to be wrongfully convicted in America than those of other races. The study was released Tuesday, March 7th by the National Registry of Exonerations. It examined 1,900 wrongful convictions for murder, sexual assault, and drug offenses between 1989 and 2016. 47% of the defendants in these cases were black, even though black Americans only make up 13% of the population. The study finds black Americans are 7 times more likely than white Americans to be wrongfully convicted for murder and 12 times more likely for drug crimes. According to Al Jazeera, Samuel Gross, a senior editor of the study, said unconscious bias, institutional discrimination, and explicit racism are all factors in wrongful convictions. A companion study released the same day showed that 2016 saw more exonerations than any previous year, at 166. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul. A new smart home robot can now detect your facial expressions. Bosch startup Mayfield Robotics created the home robot named Curry, who debuted at CES 2017 in Las Vegas. Curry's latest updates include facial detection abilities, which allow the robot to respond to human facial expressions. For example, if Curry sees that you're happy, it'll smile back at you. Curry also got an expanding voice command library. That means it can recognize phrases such as "I love you" and "go to sleep" and even respond. Mayfield Robotics' goal is to make a home robot feel like part of the family and even come in handy around the house. The Curry robot also comes with built-in speakers for music and the ability to capture photos and videos. It's even capable of detecting disturbances in your home. Curry is expected to be available for the 2017 holiday season. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
Tyson Foods is known for selling meat. Its logo can be found on packages of fresh chicken, bags of frozen steak, and bacon. But Tyson, one of the largest meat processors in the world, may be going in a different direction. The company is now eyeing meatless products. Company CEO Tom Hayes tells Fox Business he sees plant-based protein as a huge opportunity for his industry as protein consumption continues to grow around the world. Tyson Foods has been trying to create a more sustainable food system, which involves cleaning up its factory farms and investing in more plant-based protein products. In October of 2016, the company bought a 5% stake in Beyond Meat, which is a startup that makes plant-based beef and chicken mostly from pea protein, and its products contain no real meat. For Newsbeat Social New York, I'm Rumi Fukushima.
Top infectious disease specialists are warning that a yellow fever outbreak in the jungles of Brazil could bring the disease to the United States. Over the past few weeks, the Latin American country has seen an uptick in yellow fever cases in some of its rural areas. According to the Pan American Health Organization, health officials have confirmed 371 yellow fever cases, including 241 deaths. Hundreds more cases are being investigated. Since the areas in Brazil currently affected by the outbreak are close to major urban centers, including Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, where millions of people live, infectious disease experts are concerned the virus could spread into city populations there for the first time in decades.
The United Nations Human Rights Chief calls for an investigation into violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. On Wednesday, March 8th, High Commissioner for Human Rights Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein urged the UN Human Rights Council to take up an inquiry in light of the recent discovery of 3 mass graves. Just last month, the UN Security Council urged Congo's government to investigate reports that local militia in the Kasai region have been killing civilians and recruiting child soldiers. Reuters reports more than 400 people have died in central Congo since August. Speaking in Geneva on Wednesday, AFP reports Zeid also expressed disappointment in the lack of progress toward a power-sharing deal in Congo's government. The country's budget minister recently expressed doubt that long-awaited elections would be held this year. Congo has not seen a peaceful transition of power since it achieved independence in 1960. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
Researchers have reported that carbon stashed in Earth's soils are escaping into the atmosphere at a faster rate as the planet warms. The estimated extra emissions could help to intensify global warming over the next century. According to the research team, carbon dioxide emissions from soil-dwelling microbes are likely to increase by 34 to 37% by 2100. Previous studies predicted more modest gains at 9 to 12%. With soil covering about 2/3 of Earth's ice-free land, nearly 3 trillion metric tons of organic carbon are stored within it. As global temperatures rise, carbon-consuming microbes speed up their consumption of plant material, releasing even more carbon dioxide.